My name's Tom Price and I live and work in London. The inspiration for Man 9, which was one of a series of animations, stop motion animations, came from my experimentations with video work and performance pieces. I started actually in college when I was at Chelsea doing my B.A. And I was really interested in the mind and memory and how we could perhaps try and communicate a shared memory or experience to recreate that experience in another person. And so I made some video pieces which used light pulses and sound beats to try and induce certain states of mind within the viewer. So it was very much about inducing these sort of psychological states and trying to share these journeys that I had. And obviously this is kind of a very internal thing. But I started to look at the external side of it, which was like the effect, the resulting effect, which was the face. And I started to look at how else we communicate in the everyday, in the real world situation. Like where are these communications? Where do we transmit these feelings? And it came down to experiments with physiognomy. So how does a different type of face affect the way that message or that experience is read? And I think everyone is kind of in some way conscious of how they project themselves and how they're seen. I think as an artist, as an individual, I was interested with how I was seen, but as an artist I had an opportunity to kind of experiment with changing that perception or experimenting with that perception. And so I started to make very rudimentary little sculptures, heads of men, which I then kind of used stop motion animation, the technique stop motion animation, to kind of make them come alive. It was using this material, this plasticine, child's play thing, to kind of use it instead of anything happening, where you see Wallace and Gromit or kind of the Yardman animation series. Something would explode or fly across screen. I was trying to make a very still, almost meditative sort of pieces where nothing would happen except the viewer would bring their own consciousness to this piece, and it was about creating this moment where an object would become alive, it would start to move, and then this moving object would become a person, and the viewer would start to empathise with this person, so start to give it emotion, start to give it internal dialogue. And so the viewer then imbued this object with human qualities, but then because of the way it was sculpted, because it was you could see bits were wrong with it, you could see it was made of plasticine, it would then break, that cycle start to break and then perhaps start again. And so it was very much an experiment in terms of material and psychology and I don't know, a bit hark back to my beginnings, which was in performance and video work. I've always been interested in the space between the viewer and the maker. I think maker, I don't really like the term, but it's what sculptors do, it's what everyone, artists, they kind of make things. It's perception, it's that the tangibility of representation and trying to communicate something tangible or the experience of something you can hold or touch or feel, but without it actually being present, which is why, for me, video animation, I was very interested in Andrei Tarkovsky and his kind of sculpting in time, how he referenced film. And as soon as I heard that phrase, I was like, of course film sculpting in time. You edit, you bring together all these elements, you use sound, foley, all sorts of things to create this sense within the viewer of this experience. And so for me, the animations and also the video performances with the light waves and sound pulses was about trying to induce this tangible experience within a viewer. And so the material for me in the stop motion animation, like you could see where my fingers had been. You could see it slightly change, you know, because there was different time frames involved. It was about, even in the viewer's subconscious, they understood that this was material, and they understood that this wasn't, they couldn't take it for granted. You know, it deserved more consideration because it was quite clearly manufactured. It was quite clearly made for consideration. Because these animations I was trying to make work which were accessible. I was trying to make work where people could approach them head on and feel able to engage, to examine them, to have some thoughts on them. Because, you know, I was making this work around a time where it was quite common to poke fun at the viewer, or to you know, to be really cool and, you know, kind of avoid making work which spoke about anything directly. And so I wanted to make something which spoke quite directly initially about one thing, but then carried with it a weight of a whole other subject matter, perhaps under the radar kind of thing. Around this time I was looking at the work of, I was looking at Vito Conci, Matthew Barney, but also like Jean Tinguet. It was all very physical work. It was work which involved either kind of movement, physical engagement, repetition. I was also looking at Jan Zwankmajer, who, you know, the kind of the black theatre in terms of puppetry, and his use of stop motion animation in films like Alice and some of his short films, where he would make inanimate objects come to life. And he spoke about the magic. Literally, he believed in this magic of the cinema that, in terms of creating movement, and that's essentially what cinema is anyway. So I was really looking at these artists who took stuff and material and substance and, again, communicated it to the audience, and or incorporated it into their, almost ritualistically, into their performance, and they imbued it with a magic, as Zwankmajer would say, or a kind of masculine, as Barney would have it, or this kind of charged, sexualized, I don't know, sort of almost perverse thing that Conci had in his work, but he managed to formalize it so well that it became, I don't know, he expressed his body and kind of psychologically, and it really just fascinated me, this like drawing people into your mind and communicating it, but with a physical thing. So I think, and as a child, you know, Tinguet was hugely influential because I wanted to make things that moved. I wanted to make things that interacted with people. I used to make booby traps and things that would, you know, when I first went to Y.B.A, I was making sculptures which would interact with the viewer by actually being a booby trap, and it would fall down, it would collapse. And you know, especially when like a particular tutor would walk past, it would catch him, and I'd mark down the number of times he knocked it down. And just, you know, playful things like that, which kind of then grew into this sort of fascination with how the mental become physical. I think a lot of my work takes perception into account, and how that can be challenged by the viewer themselves. So it's not me as an artist saying, you need to look at it this way. I mean, that's too prescriptive and didactic, and it's not what I'm into. It's giving the viewer the responsibility, it's acknowledging the viewer's intelligence, but also acknowledging the kind of existing circumstances of how we look generally. You know, like everyone goes through their lives, is all so busy, we all can compartmentalise, we all you know, lump things into particular groups or categories. And my work tries to say, look, here's exactly what you're looking at in real life. Here's what you're looking at in your everyday. But look again. And you know, you've come to a space, you know, gallery, or you've come to a space to think, and I'm not going to give you kind of an abstract juxtaposition of a box leaning against the wall. I'm going to say, look, here's something you see every day, but now abstract it. Now use your intelligence to think about, why is that presented to you in a particular way? What's its references? So, you know, a lot of my kind of references are Western classical or ancient. You know, I look at the monumentality of kind of Greek or Roman sculpture and how that's used to kind of portray powerful men, but then to portray a powerful nation, and as a standard. And who are these people now that you're seeing in front of you in this gallery? Why are they there? Like, why is this not just, you know, a kind of a sort of a garden sculpture you've seen all the time? Why is this different? And so it's quite subtle in terms of that. Sometimes it's glanced over, but the aim is to allow people a space, a time, and like the works are like signposts or packets of information, which the tools that people can, you know, providing people the tools to explore their own thoughts, their own perceptions, their own stance on particular things, particular people. So that, yeah, providing people with this moment to kind of contemplate, which is what the animation was. It was a moment of contemplation. You're instantly confronted by this face in its own space, contemplating itself perhaps, or its own sort of life, or maybe its shopping list. But it gives the viewer that same opportunity. So following the animations, I started to look at, I was doing all sorts of experiments into physiognomy. I mean, I was sculpting various small heads, keeping them up on the shelves, and as kind of experiments or into how different bits could change faces. And I never considered showing them. It was always about the animations, always about the video installations, pieces. And again, this was at college, at the Royal College this time, and I was challenged by a tutor as to why I didn't show them as sculptures. I was like, oh, of course, you don't show them, these are just experiments. And as soon as she said that and she left the room, I was like, why don't I show them? I mean, and I started to think about these objects as ways of interacting with an audience, with viewers. But then I had to look at sculpture, you know, per se. I had to look at real sculpture. I look at the things, objects, and I'd been kind of a lot of my work. Well, when I actually applied for college, I was mistaken as I'd applied to the wrong department. Oh, you want to go to film, you want to go to animation. Whereas I was talking about the tangibility of images. So now I really had to engage with sculpture and how's it been used in the past. Like, and I had done classics at school, and I was really interested in this kind of public sculpture, but as it was back then, so monumental national sculpture, like people like Phidias, and who'd sculpted incredible stone sculptures. And so I showed head for the first time, and it was initially completely ridiculed. It was like, why have you done this? Like, you do animations. Like, this is just normal. This is Sunday painter kind of stuff, you know? Which I found incredible. This very simple object, something from the history of sculpture, was so, it almost felt like it was feared. Like, you don't do this, you know, don't break the chain, don't let this out of the bag kind of thing. So I started to look at the power of this, because it felt like it had a big power to it, like within the art world, as well as, so it engaged with the art world, my peers, on a particular level, but it also engaged with people who go to see art maybe not very regularly, you know, so people I was actually interested in communicating with. So there was this lovely sort of duality to how I could use the work. And so following on from the heads, if I jump ahead as quickly, I started to look at figures. So obviously, you know, I've talked about the face as a site of communication, yeah, kind of both passively and actively, like you can receive and transmit. I also looked at the body and how the body transmits. And I started with figures, male figures, but nude. Very classical again. It was like, here's your Greek hero, here's your Greek statue, but I'm going to make up a character. So all my figures or even the heads in the animations were made from, they're amalgamations or composites of kind of people I've observed or seen in films or kind of thought about, and ancient sculptures kind of put together in a mishmash, which was like a psychological portrait. You know, so they're not real people. They're more real because they're not a copy of something. And the figures themselves were this as well. They were composites of different bits of people I'd taken from magazines and sculptures and films. And I presented these anti-heroes, I guess. As I think about them now, they're very, very genuine. I wasn't trying to ridicule anything, but I was certainly presenting an alternative heroicism, a kind of a confidence in being imperfect, a confidence of being less than regal, or a confidence of being just, a slouch. So I presented these very natural poses, men with slight guts, or who weren't projecting this idea of themselves to anyone consciously. They were just in their natural thing, and it's almost like we were looking at them from a distance, and we'd just happened to see them. And I showed this in Chicago for the first time, and it was quite an interesting response to the work there. These kind of nude black men being viewed by all sorts of people in Chicago, but there's a very strong kind of black intellectual presence in Chicago, and I think it was quite uncomfortable because, we've moved on from that. I'm like, well, yeah, that's why we can show it, but it wasn't seen like that. It was quite uncomfortable, and so then I was asked, why are they nude? Like the Americans are like, look, if you can put a gun in front of their genitalia, that'd be better than just having them nude. But they're like, there's other people coming and asking me, why nude? I was like, well, because it was referencing classical Roman Greek sculpture, trying to inhabit this space and not say we can be just as good, but just say, well, like Picasso took African masks, I'm taking Western sculpture. Why not? Surely that's a fair enough transaction to make. But someone asked me, so why no clothes? And I said, well, of course, it's because they're classical. No clothes. They weren't. I thought, why no clothes? Like with the why don't you show the heads? It was why don't I? Let me look at clothing, and can it be used in a way which doesn't close down options for exploration from the viewer? Like, I don't want to anchor them too particularly into a very narrow vein of who they are. I want the viewer to be able to create these stories of these people, and therefore to pull out more of their own views, their own subconscious. And so I try to create clothing based on classical renderings of clothing. So I talk about drapery. And so with sportswear, which is a figure which is just over 2 foot tall, he's got a perforated kind of American football jersey on. And that, to me, that spoke about this kind of transatlantic Americanization of culture, and particularly black culture, I guess. But I was thinking of someone who, I got a brother who used to wear them a lot, and it was just this kind of, it just talked about this kind of, I don't know, this global idea of sports, and it made me think of this empire, but then maybe a Roman Empire, and then the British Empire, but then how this American empire is kind of taking over. But it was this, it's a bit of a joke in terms of he doesn't look very sporting. He's got a bit of weight to him. But the fabric and the clothing moves in a particular way, which is like, it drapes like a classical sculpture or a neoclassical sculpture. It's handled in the same way. It's given the same thought, almost the same reverence. Its value as these kind of sculptures, which I've seen in museums. So it's not so much it's not how they were initially perhaps intended, which is more kind of homes, private commissions, but it's how I've been fed this historical sculpture, which is via museums. And so I was trying to make pieces which were of the same value culturally, historically, as these very important sculptures that we should look at on their plinths in these institutions. And that's why the sculpture itself, sportswear, sits upon an old rickety but antique wooden, what they call pedestal, but I'm calling a plinth. So this idea of elevation, this idea of it standing upon, so this contemporary figure in a classical medium bronze, usually associated with high value, stands upon a kind of a reclaimed antique plinth, which looks like it could have come out of, I don't know, the corner of the National Gallery or something. It could have, it's many things. It's quite it's a amalgamation itself. The figure is an amalgamation, and the actual sculpture is a mishmash of bits. Because then it goes on a very contemporary-looking sprayed base, which are referencing car colours. I mean, they're literally car colours, and which then goes on top of a a translucent perspex piece. So it's kind of this flow of times and periods and aesthetics, trying to talk about institution, power, the individual, a notion of the individual in many different contexts, and who we decide is going to represent us as the individual, as a nation. So it's quite a complex piece, and it's quite hard to talk about in a summarising kind of way, but yeah, it's quite a very important piece for me. Yeah, I think ambiguity runs through my work, hopefully, throughout all of it, because I never want to tie off the ends and go, well, it's between here, this and this, and that's it. It's about keeping it open. And as I say, it's about giving the power to the viewer. So I present these quite densely bits of information, these sculptures, and say, I don't need to be there now. Now it's up to you. So really, I try and consider everything about them and how sportswear and the other pieces from Angeltown show kind of stand on their plinths and precariously kind of wave around a little bit, and as you step near them, it might wobble. But it's about the precariousness of thoughts and perception and attitudes and how they change and how they are what the foundation of them is slightly rickety. It's also about how these institutions are actually really quite superficial in terms of the power we give them, and how we also have the power to change them, and we give them their meaning. It's only because we accept them, continue them, that they exist. We could change it. I'm talking about all sorts of institutions here. I'm not just like one thing, but just generally, I'm talking about the power of individuals and as groups in society to imbue meaning to objects, buildings, people, groups of people, the individuals we meet every day. So for me, the plinths are a really important part of trying to communicate that precariousness, that slightly wobbly foundation that we're all basing our contemporary thoughts on at the moment. Well, not all, but a lot of people. I mean, network for me, it kind of contains within it a lot of challenges, a lot of questions I was asking myself coming off the back of the show with Hale's Gallery, with Angeltown, which was the smaller figures. And I'd become known, if at all, for my work on small scale. So small sculptures claiming a lot of space, sort of talking about monumentality, the plinths or the coloured bases and the plinths talking about or antiques and talking about kind of historical kind of elements within the work and the kind of histories of sculpture and people and these sort of and status. And so when it came to network, which was based upon a smaller sculpture I'd made, a 3-foot sculpture, which was very much in the same vein as the previous ones. Just like the way I challenged, I guess, myself in terms of why don't I show the sculptural experiments of physiognomy from the animations? So why don't I actually show an object? Oh, I don't know, I should really look at that. I should try that. Then from the nude figures, why don't I use clothing? Oh, I really should look at why, really test, because I had a reason why, but let me test that reason why. And again, it became with scale. So network is 9 foot tall. I mean, it's a considerable leap from the original 2 foot tall figures talking about they don't have to be big. They still contain the confidence. They still contain a self-contained sort of. It doesn't matter if the viewer's there. They interact. They draw the viewer in. They create this distance. Network was about confronting the idea of the monument head on and trying to see how the character could query what we see around us all the time, particularly in London, well, not just London, but particularly in the UK. A lot of the sculptures in Bristol and other places are around that scale, of very particular people. It tends to be people who've killed a lot of other people, you know, but then got a title for it. And they stand on these quite, you know, these big plinths. And we go past them every day down Whitehall, or, you know, what's the square behind, you know, the ICA and things like that. And most people don't notice them, but they're still register. That's reinforcing a particular idea of maleness, and I wanted to see if I can challenge that. So I took a person based on, kind of based on bits of me, based on bits of people I see around, kind of I'm a studio in Deptford, and you know, and the kind of, perhaps thinking about it now, ideas of people who have been portrayed in the media in a particularly negative way. And I thought, well, I'll just present that in quite a straight-on way. So it's a young man holding a mobile phone, looking at it, wearing a kind of a body warmer. You know, nothing too amazing there. But it is when you see it. It's so if I go away from the scale, just in terms of who you're looking at, it's so different to the chin up, shoulders back. You know, arms on the hips, thrusting forward, projecting power, and I don't know, a sense of you know, deserving everything, and it's a very unbalanced, slightly unsure, introspective piece about technology and anxiety, and that's, you know, it doesn't, not even sure if the guy's looking at the phone, but there's that area is charged between there, and how this medium is kind of affecting our communications with people, and you know, this thing that's supposed to give us so much more access to people is it removing us from people? I mean, the smaller version I did was actually intended as a commission, and it was rejected as being too controversial for the area, because it could be considered as a rioter, because it happened. You know, I made it before the riots in London, and not based around that at all. But it was interesting because it's perception and of people's fear of it being perceived in such a way. So it's you know, that comment was made by someone who was completely not that way inclined to think like that, but their fear was it could be. So it still shows that there's this residual set of values which affect their judgments on things, which affect people who kind of look like me. And so I wanted to, you know, it's a kind of, I wanted to put that out there and test it more. But formally, the piece talks a lot about, well, the scale of it is about how we interact with it. And I always talk about the approach to a sculpture, or the approach to a piece of work. And it's about interacting with people on a public level, out in an exterior level. So removing from the gallery, and now let's put this out in the street, and let's see how it affects people. You know, it's like you see someone in the distance, you walk towards them, there might be that, oh, I thought that person had a much bigger presence when I was, but actually they're tiny, or that person had no presence, and now they're, you know, I'm looking up like that to them. You approach the sculpture from a distance, and then suddenly it looms up above you. And you know, being in the black patina, it's, some people in an internal environment, it can be quite menacing. Just anyone that scale can be menacing. But I showed it at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, in fact, where it's on loan at the moment. And you got, you know, scale-wise, you've got these huge trees, and you approach it from a very long distance, and you just think it's a person standing down, and as you walk down to it by this lake, suddenly you realise it's 9 foot, and 9 foot is considerable, you know, in terms of volume as well. And it just places the viewer in a position physically and conceptually, where they're able to stand and stare at this person. They're able to stand on its foot and try and climb up it. You know, it's this figure that has been misinterpreted as a rioter is suddenly this kind of quite an approachable set of physical cues that people can, oh, I didn't think, you know, that suddenly they find themselves, they think it's friendly or kind of poignant. Like it's sad, or you know, it's allowing, again, like I spoke about with the heads and the animations, it's allowing people a space and a moment to reflect and to and to have empathy with a set of physical cues that they can then respond to. And it just happens that the network is, is larger because I'm trying to do it on a larger scale. I'm trying to now take it out of the gallery space and place it in a public arena where it can be kind of engaged with, perhaps on a larger, on a wider scale. I'm embarrassed because I don't remember hearing the term post-black until I received the email from you, kind of saying, we're looking at aspects of post-black in arts, and obviously now I've read it, it feels like I've heard it again and again, for years before, but I don't think I had. The show which kind of jettisoned that out into the public arena, kind of, what was 91? And so I was just starting, I think my undergraduate course at Chelsea. But I seem to have been occupying a similar space to some of the things I've read about post-black and what it was trying to do, which is, I find it very interesting in terms of, it seems to be, artists who happen to be black or not white, making work which tries to be about more than the colour they happen to be, while still containing elements of that experience, because, well, of course it's going to. If you make work which has anything to do with your person or your experience as a person, it's going to contain some of those elements. And it's always such a complex sort of situation to be in, because I can remember being at college and when I started to make work which had an image of a black man, the first one, all the questions suddenly changed. Like, I had a previous animation of a white man, and it was all about who is he, what's he thinking, what's his emotion, what's his, and then I did one with the black guy, and it was like, he's black. Why is he black? Literally, why is he black? And I remember thinking, it's just, I hadn't even noticed, and so I felt a bit ashamed that I hadn't noticed that he was black, because I was just making a person. And so it's this idea of post-black. It's almost like, well, you represent this to us. You got to fly the flag, and we're going to ask you these questions until you give us the answers that will kind of satisfy us. So my work has increasingly taken on awareness, not necessarily dealt with, but awareness of this idea that race, ethnicity, whatever you want to call it, depending which country you're in, is important to many, many people. And it is important to me, but it's not what the work was about. It didn't generate the work, but it certainly influenced aspects of it, aspects of sensitivity. What's it like to be different? What's it like not to be in a majority? So looking at things perhaps a little differently. What's it like to be looked at? I'm sure the same thing happens with women when it comes to kind of feminist work. So it's about being a woman. Well, why would it's kind of, it's very interesting. But yeah, the more I've read about post-black, the more I like it, really, in terms of especially across in the States, where you've got a lot of artists making very intelligent work, which contains elements of being black. But it's not about being a black artist. It's about communicating very particular experiences and sensitivities or sensibilities to the world around them. And the world around them, or the world around me at the moment, seems to find it important that I'm not white. And so I find it important as an artist, interacting with the world around me, that's important. So, like most work, my practice relies on people bringing things to it, and letting them, and then finding what's more important to them. And so when people bring stuff to my work, originally it was like very much, it was a one-way thing. They brought blackness to it, and I was like, oh, I was doing a person. But now, because of my awareness, it's slightly more complex, but it's still, the onus is on them in terms of how far into it they want to read, because I'm still trying to make work which is universally human. I make humanist work, which came from the abstract. I've kind of always thought of these pieces as abstract. Because they're mishmashes. Yes, they look convincingly like a unique person, but to me they're an experiment. They're a different arrangement of cues for people to respond to. And so, that's why they're often mistaken as just like straight on sculpture, which is kind of a compliment, but then it's, given the context, it's interesting that, I don't know, it's kind of, it's tricky. I guess I've always tried to be. I remember saying actually on record. I guess I was at the Tricycle Theatre and there was like it was for filmmakers, but I'd made the animation. I showed the installation there, and it was black directors talking about being good black directors and making black films. And because I wasn't from the film world, and I kind of just raised my hand and said I'd kind of like to be looked at as an artist, not a black artist, because why you don't need that kind of extra classification, because the work I've looked at is I've looked at a range of artworks, and I would like to be considered in the same vein as that. I would like to show and the take, but under in a wider context, not just because I happen to be of a certain colour and the work can be easily identified by that. So I think there's a really important need to look at the work of artists for the various kind of ideas they offer and kind of bring up in the viewers' minds and what they offer to society and go in the bigger argument. But I completely understand if people's first way in is the blackness of it. But it gets a bit of a lazy label, really. I mean, it's the humanity of it, and we share these experiences. And because someone happens to be black, it might make them slightly sensitive or aware of other things, which they then are able to communicate via the work. And that has as much to offer someone from another race as it does to black people. I like to think that my work speaks about a longing for understanding and communication and an acceptance of anxiety, an acceptance of misinterpretation on a human level, as well as a more specific racial level. The racial level just happens to be the way that I've been made aware of these things, but it's not the thing. And if I were to only ever be considered a black artist, then I think I'd be a bit upset by that, just because it would show that nothing's changing. And also the idea of post-black, it takes, as someone who's actually mixed race, my mother's white, my father's black, and who kind of, I had questions the entire time about what do I think I am, and what do I consider myself. So it's much more complex than, I could then talk about, what's the definition of black? I mean, I think it's different in America than it is in the UK in terms of the definition of black, but I think the American definition seems to be more persuasive or gathering more kind of cachet here in the UK. So I think as someone who's tried to resist race for so long, to then suddenly professionally be kind of caught up into notions of race which are quite prescriptive, limiting almost. I hope we can use the power of it, the kind of the draw of it to then break it open and talk about the humanistic elements. I sound a bit hippie-ish, but it's like really trying to talk about the universal and what it brings, what that brings to work or to a practice or an understanding or a practice. It's interesting because I think a lot of my work was quite a personal journey. My work talks about the personal, talks about the internal. But when I look at the work of, it was like Karen Walker and David Hammonds, David particularly because I was looking at work I was looking at influences like around me And I think he did this incredibly tall basketball hoop kind of thing. And I used to play basketball, and it just, as an object that I could recognize, it had resonance. And as a visual metaphor, or, it had real power. And I just thought, that's incredibly clever work. I think I was a teenager, I just thought, I get it. I mean, I get it initially, and now it's also making me think about it further. And so that's kind of what I really respected about it. It was work which had an instant sort of hook, and then a subtler power which resonated underneath and kept going, and kind of rumbled along and drew out your own feelings and thoughts about it. And I think it's that approach to work that's kind of really pushed me along, really inspired me. And also, like Steve McQueen, when I saw some of his video pieces, it was the confidence in them, it was the slow, it was the quietness, and that kind of standing front, straight on, and they're quite poetic. You probably wouldn't say that, but they're quite poetic in this. And also because I love film, it really kind of hit something in me. It really kind of connected to something, and because it wasn't about being black, but it just happened. He was using himself, and it was just. And it's like, why would you then try and go out of your way to not be black? That's playing the same game. That's falling foul of the same extra set of rules that, perhaps white men don't have to play by. And so it was about acknowledging, resisting, but then going with, whatever you felt was right. And I really responded to those artists. It's interesting, the notion of global art world for me is it's becoming, I wouldn't say more important, but more apparent, in terms of, now I go to art fairs, and I still like to go along with them. It gives me an excuse to get out of the country. But you get to see what all these different galleries from around the world are kind of interested in and trying to present to people. And I know that there's aspects of people presenting certain works to different countries, so it's a sort of a slightly false sense of what's happening. Like the first time I went to America as an artist, I was very interested in terms of the different handling of, I guess, of my work versus someone else who was perhaps talking about elements of blackness or otherness or identity, that kind of stuff. And I felt that there was I don't know, it was kind of like a less, it was stronger, not stronger, that's the wrong term, but it was more apparent. In America, I found it a lot kind of louder, the work, a lot sort of more like, this is our identity, and this is we're pride in blackness, and because they were very clear about what blackness was. Whereas in my own work, I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was other. I just knew it was about not being that. And so it was interesting to see that difference. But I've noticed, that was years and years and years ago. But I've noticed now that it's changed a lot more, and this is sort of, it's not a homogeny, but there's certainly an aesthetic. There's always been a current aesthetic, which is popular and which you can sell work with. And I think, like even when I was at college, I always tried to resist that aesthetic. I chose a medium which is kind of like you don't make figurative sculpture now, With Y.B.A's, when I started doing the performance piece, I'm back in Chelsea, I licked the room, 3 days to kind of cover it with an invisible layer of saliva, which was about communicating the essence of me on a molecular level. And then it's ended up bleeding and become a very kind of like, overt piece. It was about trying to fit into or add my name to that list of people making quite overtly controversial works, which would gain notoriety, and when that piece actually achieved that, and it was like, oh great, wow. But then I had to really think about it. I said, well, how do I carry on with this? And I could see one avenue that would take me down, and it was a path I did not want to go down, which making more and more elaborately pieces of work which needed attention, needed people to like, oh, gasp, and which were very kind of external. And I was really interested in the internal and the nuances and subtleties. And as I said before, like about giving people credibility, giving people, respecting their intelligence and saying, look, you know what this is about. Just give yourself that extra beat to think it through. And so I turned to quieter work.
Was that a turning point?
That was a turning point for me, definitely, because it was either I carry on and I try and become this kind of this name. It would be more about the individual than the work, and I didn't want to be about the individual. I wanted to be about the work. I wanted to actually try and communicate and explore things via the work. But that was it was a very particular kind of thing at the time, and it could get you quite successful quite quickly, I think. But yeah, I made the opposite of that. Like when I was making small pieces, of work because everyone I was making work with, or all the work I saw around me, was very large kind of constructions of things and environments. And so I was like, well, I'll try this angle then. I'll go the other side. I'll let you guys do that and I'll do this. And when I was doing the figures, it was about, because I was told, no one does that. You don't do that. That's not valid work. And so I wanted to challenge why that wasn't valid work. And it just happened to kind of resonate with the fact that it was of people, and people who I didn't think were being seen anyway. And so it just, serendipity. It just happened to kind of fit what I was trying to achieve at the time. Relatively young enough to be enthusiastic and kind of excited when I go to these things, and it's more about meeting people than standing next to the work. I try and stay away from where the gallery shows the work, and I certainly don't participate in the selling or the pricing and that side of it, because it can tear you apart, that kind of the element of it. The hardest thing is to not get drawn into that aesthetic trap of, oh, this person's doing well. That's an interesting way of doing it. Let me do that. Let me try and incorporate that. I think it's about having confidence in your train of thought and your line of questioning, and giving it time. And I think this idea of globalization has come with technology itself. Everything's faster. You can email a picture of your work somewhere. You can have someone. Oh, I've got a client in Dubai for your work, or I've got a client in Hong Kong or America, and it's like, well, this is coming from making it in a little studio in South London. So the demand is there, and I don't know. A lot of people I think there's a lot of pressure to conform to these visual tastes. And as I say, I've always tried to retain my own sense of, what is this visual about? Why am I making it like this? What am I trying to provoke or instigate with this thing? So how can I keep this work authentic? I guess it's about being authentic, and having confidence in the identity of your work, one's work, and being an artist, and being prepared to be looked over sometimes, or mistaken sometimes for something else, but knowing that eventually that work might just get the right reception at the right time. So global is exciting. It's certainly nice to show in different countries because it gives you new context, and it gives you an extra bit of friction to kind of rub off and see new layers in the work. But I still try and retain that sense of personal and local, because that's what's going to give it value in the end. It's the individual's take on it, and not just a kind of a median version of what the initial idea was. It's about making it as specific to me as an artist, and then maybe that will have value for the global. Well, when I first started studying, it was curators, but then the artists were the interesting thing. They were the draw, and it's very much you know, in just over like 10 years or so, 14, 15 years, it's become more like, you know, the curator will be the draw for the show, will be the publicity side of things, and will be the thing that gets people in the door, which I find very interesting. I mean, I think as a curator, I'm not one, but I imagine, you know, they get to travel around. The ones I know, they travel around more, and they're seeing various things. So perhaps that adds to the global, because they have to be global. You know, you can't just curate. Well, I imagine you can't just curate in London, or you can't just curate in New York or wherever. So they're always talking about a globalized art world, and my work is put into context via this awareness of an artist who's making similar work to you, but in somewhere else, which actually is interesting and very useful in terms of knowing what's out there.
Have you found that? Have you found?
Yeah. Oh, in America a lot, you know. I mean, like, when I think about America, I think of a place which I actually go to quite often and feel reasonably at home at, but I'm very aware of the differences, and I like those differences, and I think that's why I'm interested in American work, and hopefully that's why they're interested in my work, because it gives us a slightly different take on a similar subject. But when I don't know, when a curator's talking about your work in such a way that, I don't know, it's very interesting when someone comes into your studio and they've come from another country, you know, just recently, or another 3 countries, and they're talking about, you know, another 4 they were in last month, and they're talking about all the artists they've seen. In a sense, that's eye-opening as an artist to hear that and to get that sense of context, or that sense of the wider art world. But it's also like, I don't know if it's daunting as well. Most artists are concerned with what they're doing, and a curator talking about artist's work is one thing. Someone talking about the value of work is another thing. And I think once someone's conversation goes from ideas, you know, the currency of ideas, to monetary, and then how that compares, so that globalization of the commercial art world, then it becomes a bit more, you know, less interesting for me, to be honest. Less interesting for me, because I don't really care what so-and-so sold a piece of work for, because, you know, I'm stupid enough not to be in this business for the cash. You know, it's the ideas that are the interesting currency, and yeah.
Are the curators about ideas, or are they about the selling, or both?
Well, hopefully they're about ideas, but I think the selling is very seductive. And I think that if an artist is selling lots of work, it tends to mean they're getting a higher profile. It means they're showing more. It means they're on the radar more. It means that curators are more likely to talk to me about them, because they've just seen their big show at X, Y, and Z gallery. So those two are often linked. And as I say, it's not necessarily a negative, but it's, I don't know, I think it can be a limiting factor in terms of the number of people you hear about. So it's often linked. It's often linked, and I don't know. They're often very, very good artists, and it's great to hear about them. But when another curator comes in and talks to you about them, you're like, okay, yeah, I heard about that, and another one, okay. So that's why when, you know, as an artist, if you go traveling yourself, it's great, because then you get to kind of organize your own kind of schedule, and you get to see new things. And I don't know. It's the curators I know are very much about the ideas, and you can see it. You know, they're excited about the ideas. But as I say, it's often those ideas are linked to artists who have got the exposure, and the exposure is linked to money. I work in a manner which I use silhouette a lot in terms of form, and through the process I use shape, and I'm interested formally in sculpture. You know, I got into it via the conceptual idea of like trying to represent this tangible thing, but I really fell in love with looking at classical sculptures and discovering the formal elements to them, and looking at composition, essentially, 3-dimensional composition. So for me, it's just been a continual process of trying to break apart and then reconstitute various different sculptures from history and create my own kind of compositions, which is quite a formal way of looking at it. It's quite a very art school way. It's a very self-referencing thing, but within that there are, I reckon, certain truths in terms of how one responds to form and what works and what doesn't, what becomes a compelling piece of work, what's a compelling form, what's a compelling shape, composition, and how can I use that to then carry the message, to carry the conversation, the ideas that I have. And it's about creating the most compelling thing for me to really get people and to induce engagement with people. Yeah, gender in the work is always been kind of a talking point, even when I was studying, because it's concentrated on the male figure, the male character, the male head, the male face. So basically the male psyche, and it's one because it's portrayed in such a way. It's it's the de facto representation, figurative representation of society. It's usually the male's perspective anyway, in film, in sculpture, and the artist is always thought of as a man. Perhaps then there was this side. So it was about power as well, and about status. And so initially I took figures which looked, so they're white men, and they looked like they would be associated with power and status, and then I undermined that or questioned that with the expression of vulnerability, of introspective questioning of, I might appear to be this, but in fact I'm existing as this. So it's about opening up and looking at alternatives of this visual thing, or this type, this archetype. And then when I started to sculpt or animate black men, it was about looking again at that archetype, how that's being carried through history, how that's being changed or charged with certain qualities, and also as a black man, how I'm able to reference those kind of perceived qualities to my everyday, to my questions. How I've had questions about me and stuff, and it's quite personal work. It's the idea of the authentic, and using this male figure as a way to communicate a much wider discussion, a much wider exploration of truth. I think, hopefully, because it's authentic, it carries with it an ability to transcend the gender side of it. I mean, I have sculpted women, but they come into they go against this sort of usual male sculptor representation of women. So it's kind of acknowledging the de facto, the kind of historical norm. But really, it's about trying to be authentic and trying to communicate something in a subtle way, which and show that it can transcend, regardless of the gender. But yeah, it's a very it's a deep topic which probably needs more time to discuss. But it's about authenticity.